That is, what would have happened if Goku fell into High School of the Dead, from Chapter 1 to 3, The Virus and the Cure.
Aquí viene.
We would see how this story would begin in the courtyard of Fujimai Academy, where the sweet aroma of the cherry trees still lingered, a somewhat surreal detail, since just a second ago the emergency bell had sounded, indicating that the world had descended into true chaos. Takeshi, wake up, would say the sharp voice of Arei Miyamoto in panic, snapping the boy out of his slight trance as he wondered how everything had ended up like this, finding himself facing a classmate, a boy from the baseball team whose name he didn't even remember, who had lunged at a teacher. He wasn't hitting her, but rather biting her with an unnatural force, his jaws closing on her neck with a wet and dreadful crunch, as a spray of warm blood was seen splashing onto Takeshi's cheek. The chaos was absolute, and the screams of terror mixed with growls that sounded nothing like human. "We have to get out of here," shouted Arei, grabbing Takeshi's arm with desperate strength, who, with his survival instinct already activated, grabbed an abandoned baseball bat near his feet, thus dodging not only the outrageous scene, but also the multitude of corpses in front of them. In their flight towards the main exit, they ran into others, such as Saiko Busujima, the goddess of Kendo, who amidst the chaos was defending herself with her sword in an elegant and terrifying way. Near her was also Kota Hirano, the otaku obsessed with weapons, who was firing a pellet shotgun with tears in his eyes, while running and saying, "I knew it, I knew this would happen someday." And in the midst of all this was also Saya Takeshi, who watched everyone with a cold and analytical gaze, as if she were studying not only the undead, but also her classmates. With these same individuals, a group united by the instinct of survival, they would make their way to the main exit doors of the institute, heading towards the great city of Tokyo, where black smoke and burning cars were what stood out. But as if that weren't the craziest thing seen today for them, suddenly they would see the sky split in two, not by thunder, but rather by a tear in the fabric of reality, a vibration that rumbled in their bones and made them stagger. This was an immense pressure, which forced them to crouch down while looking up, seeing how a black crack would open like a wound in the sky, and from its interior, a projectile of green and golden energy that plummeted to crash into the earth, tracing a line of fire. The projectile, which was something unknown to them, had crashed in the park, just a block away from the school. After the impact, the sound shattered the windows and raised a cloud of dust and debris that darkened the entire area for a moment. The shockwave was a wall of solid air that swept across the courtyard, throwing the nearby zombies into the air. And after this, only a silence remained along with the dust that settled slowly, revealing a smoking crater several meters in diameter while in its center a figure moved. It was a man, who was tall and with great musculature, and who also wore a strange orange and blue GI. After the crash into the earth, he got up staggering slightly, and rubbing the back of his neck with an expression of absolute confusion, he would say to himself, "Hey, this isn't Mount Baozu, but what's going on? Is this some kind of attack?" would say the new guy, looking around. To which, from a distance, returning to Takeshi, Arei, and Saiko, they would only watch paralyzed, wondering who this was, and how he had survived that, thus seeing how the stranger emerged from the crater, and as soon as he came out, he would be attacked by several undead. With a dry punch here, and a low kick there, that would be all the stranger needed to knock out the undead. "I wonder what's going on, and why are these people so violent?" the man would say to himself, frowning with genuine perplexity. This was seen with great astonishment by Saiko, who lowered her sword upon witnessing a level of mastery and power that was beyond anything she had ever imagined. But unfortunately, that great capacity for fighting instinct would not notice a small child who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, who was in his torn school uniform with half his face torn off, who lunged with great speed. His target wasn't the torso or the neck, but the unprotected leg of the newly arrived. To which Goku, abstracted in his thoughts looking at the whole place where he was, suddenly felt a sharp sting in his calf. "Ow," was all he said at the moment, more out of surprise than pain. Thus looking down, where the little zombie had sunk its teeth into his flesh with monstrous strength for its size. But the strangest thing wasn't the attack itself, but the sensation that accompanied it, a piercing cold, an instantaneous necrosis that spread from the wound. The skin around the small fang holes turned a pale gray, and a faint, foul-smelling black smoke began to rise from the wound. Thus seeing Goku, who with a gesture of annoyance pushed the child away with a gentle movement, sending him rolling on the ground where he lay motionless. But the damage was already done. Looking into the distance, he made eye contact with the group of survivors, revealing an expression of confusion with a grimace of pain and bewilderment. That really hurt," he would murmur while a strange pallor began to spread across his face. But as if this weren't the worst of it, a new horde of zombies, attracted by the noise and the smell of fresh blood, emerged from the buildings in search of the cause of it all. "This can't be, this is bad," Kota would say with the shotgun in hand, already ready for the worst. While Takeshi, looking around, managed to see not too far away the school bus. Without thinking, along with his great team, they headed there, and once inside, without thinking, they went in search of Goku, who was barely standing. In him, the virus combined with his Saiyan physiology was seen to react in an unprecedented way. "Are you sure about this? He's already one of them, he's infected," Psycho would say with a tense voice. To which Takeshi, who was driving, upon arriving near where Goku was, looking at the man who now trembled uncontrollably, clenching his fists, would say, "We have to take him. He is our only hope." That would be all Takeshi would say, seeing the great power of the Saiyan, thinking that he could be the solution to the great problem that had occurred just minutes before. Thus, loading Goku and putting him in the school bus to escape from the great wave of zombies that was approaching. Now then, after what happened, it would be seen how the school bus was navigating the crumbling streets of Tokyo. This was thanks to Takeshi, who with white-knuckled hands gripped the steering wheel, swerving around abandoned cars and driving through curtains of black smoke with desperate determination. And next to him in the passenger seat was Rei, who watched the road with wide eyes as each distant explosion made her body shudder. This while the rest of the group huddled in the seats for safety, and with the Saiyan now lying in the aisle on an improvised, torn blanket. This individual was not the same man they had seen emerge from the crater, as from that imposing figure now only a body shivering violently from the cold he felt could be seen. "And where are we going?" Kota's voice would suddenly ask, breaking the silence. "Away from here, that's all that matters," Psycho would respond from the back. It was then that Saya moved, kneeling beside Goku, ignoring the stench and the tremors he provoked. The girl's gaze was cold, trying to scan every detail of the subject, while the Saiyan's muscles contracted spastically and veins stood out under his skin like rivers of dark ink, especially on his calf, where the bite was, showing a blackish, viscous substance. But what was most fascinating and terrifying for Saya was that the necrosis was not spreading uniformly, and on the contrary, it could be seen fighting to recover. "Incredible," Saya would murmur to herself, thus pulling a pen from her pocket with which she gently pressed the edge of the wound, causing Goku's body to arch, while his somewhat drooping eyes looked at Saya, who did not flinch and held that gaze, mentally noting the pupil dilation and muscle contraction of the infected. "Saya, get away from him," Psycho's voice would say upon seeing how close she was, while her hand instinctively closed around the hilt of her sword. "It's okay, it's fine, he's containing the infection," Saya would say. But just at those words, the bus would give a sudden jolt as it passed over a body lying on the asphalt, causing Kota to fall forward with his shotgun and sustain a minor injury on his forehead, which would quickly cause the Sien to react strangely, starting with the trembling of his body, which stopped abruptly, and then seeing how he would rise slightly, looking at Kota. This while his lips retracted, showing his clenched teeth, and from between them, a thread of thick, shiny saliva began to drip onto the bus floor. "Ko Kota, get back," Rei stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Goku. Thus suddenly seeing how with a movement he grabbed the bespectacled boy by the throat, lifting him and staring fixedly. This alongside Psycho, who quickly acted, and with her sword launched an attack, but upon doing so it would be stopped by Goku's other hand, who upon seeing this would regain consciousness and release Kota. "What's happening?" Goku would say, kneeling and touching his head to see the rest of the group who were frightened by the situation. But it was then that Saya, with great bravery, approached Goku again and placed her hand on his back. "Everything's fine, calm down," the girl would say, looking at the Sien. To which Goku, upon hearing such words, held his breath for a moment, wondering how he had ended up there, and who these people whom he had never seen before were. Thus remembering minutes before when he was training with Whis, with whom, after a small clash of energies with Ultra Instinct active, he would be absorbed by a strange portal, thus not only falling into this new world but also contracting a never-before-seen virus. I am sorry, I don't know what happened to me," Goku would say, now a little calmer, standing up and looking at his hands, which were very pale. "My name is Goku, and who are you?" he would ask. To which those present, still frightened by what happened, would be surprised to see how this guy, who was not only strong, had been able to contain the infection. "My name is Saya, and we are some of the few survivors, as you might have observed," the girl would say. "Survivors? And where are we?" the Sien would ask again. "We are in Tokyo," Saya would respond. To which Goku, upon hearing such words, would not recall a place called Tokyo existing in his world, thus only sighing at the situation. Thus, a few seconds later, after things had calmed down a bit more, he would tell those present more exactly who he was. The story he would tell upon being heard would be impossible to believe, as in his account there were gods, angels, and beings from other planets. But then it was Saya who, after processing Goku's incredible story, spoke again. "If it's true that you come from another world, with gods and angels, and that your body is fighting the virus, that changes everything. You're not just another survivor, not even just a weapon, you are the only potential cure," Saya would say. To which Takeshi, still with his eyes fixed on the road, would ask, "What do you mean, Saya?" "I mean that driving around Tokyo looking for gasoline and food will only keep us alive a little longer, but if we can understand how his immune system, or his ki, or whatever, is containing the infection, we could find a way to replicate it. We could find a cure," Saya would say, which resonated in the vehicle, giving hope to those present. "And how do you intend to do that?" "We're not scientists," Rei would ask, somewhat skeptical. "That's simple. My father is one, or well, he was," Saya declared, remembering a bit of her past. To which Goku, who barely understood this, scratched his head, remembering Bulma when she talked about the time machine. "Ha! You want to study my blood?" the Sien would say. "Something like that. It's the only way to end this," Rei would say, hopeful that it would be so. To which Psycho, who had not removed her hand from her sword's hilt, slowly nodded. "She's right, Takeshi. That's better than an eternal flight," Psycho would say. To which the boy, upon hearing what was said, with a small smile and a sigh, would abruptly turn the bus's steering wheel while saying, "If that's the case, then let's set course for the Takeshi family laboratory in Meguro. This while Goku, who after what happened still didn't feel well, let himself fall into a seat, observing those around him, and along with this, touching his chest and looking at his calf, which apparently wasn't entirely well, and in his head where that instinct of hunger still was. This alongside Saya, who did not take her eyes off the scene, telling herself that no matter the cost, she would find the cure for the virus that had turned her world into a hell. Now then, several minutes would pass and the school bus would reach its destination, where they wouldn't see just any building, but rather a well-protected place, with reinforced windows and a perimeter of electrified fences that luckily were still running on backup generators. Everyone inside, quick, Takeshi would say with his voice rough from tension and inhaled smoke. The group quickly entered the place where the austere luxury of the location clashed brutally with the apocalyptic reality outside. Meanwhile, Goku, somewhat dizzy and staggering, leaned against the wall, breathing with difficulty. "Are you okay?" Saya would ask upon seeing him, approaching without fear. I feel strange," Goku would admit, rubbing his arm where the chills were intensifying. Saya, holding him by the arm, guided him to one of the examination rooms, a clean and sterile space with a gurney and medical instruments. "Rest here. In the meantime, I'll prepare to start with the samples," Saya would say, putting on a gown and gloves herself. Meanwhile, the rest of the group inspected the place, seeing if they could find anything that might be helpful. "So, Goku, tell me, how are you so strong? I know you're from another world, gods, angels, it's crazy, and how, above all, did you end up here? But tell me, how did you become so strong?" Saya would ask. Goku, faced with such questions, would look at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "It's about ki, the energy of life itself. Every living being has it, but in your world it seems almost no one knows how to use it," Goku would respond. "Ki? Like in fighting movies?" Ari would ask, who, not being too far away, was curiously drawn in upon hearing this. "Something like that, but it's more real. With it, we can use it to fly, shoot energy beams, and to fight. Also, I'm a Saiyan, with warrior blood, and since I was very young I've known how to use it without problem, although it's true I was shaped through training in fights with more powerful beings." "So that's why you became so strong?" Saya would ask. "You could say yes, although I'm by no means the strongest, as there are many stronger where I come from. For example, Lord Beerus, the god of destruction. He's in charge of, well, destroying planets that are no longer useful," Goku would say, leaving Saya and Ari quite surprised. "Destroy planets? That's quite terrifying," Ari would say. "Something like that. And when we first met, I couldn't do anything against his power, absolutely nothing. Every blow I landed was like hitting a mountain of steel, while he knocked me out with a single finger," Goku would say, remembering the scene while looking at his fists with a small smile. After such talk, a few minutes later, Saya would be ready to begin, while the whole group gathered back in the room to help with whatever was necessary as well. "Well then, Goku, I need samples of your blood, especially now that your body is still fighting," Saya would say. Goku nodded, somewhat confused, but it was then, when he saw the needle, that he made a great face of fear and tried to escape, thus falling off the gurney due to the weakness of his body. But with the help of Takeshi and Psycho he couldn't do much about it. And precisely at that moment, as the needle penetrated his skin, it happened. The metallic scent of his own blood combined with the smell of fear, especially Kota's, who still had a small cut on his forehead from the bus incident, activated that primitive part of Goku's brain once again. His normally serene and kind eyes dilated, his pupils contracted to black points, and a low growl resonated from the depths of his throat. His body, which had just been weak, tensed, and every part of his muscles toned. Goku? Saya would whisper, paralyzed with the syringe still in her hand. She would receive no response, and instead, with great force, he sent Takeshi and Psycho, who were trying to hold him, flying. It was impossible. The zombie instinct, pure and devastating, had taken control for a few seconds. This time, grabbing and lifting Saya by the throat, she didn't flinch and grabbed the Sin's wrist while saying, "I know you're in there. Fight. Don't let it defeat you," Saya would say, barely able to speak due to the lack of air, staring intently into Goku's eyes, who blinked immediately and released Saya upon hearing those words. I'm sorry," Goku would say, breathing, and looking at his hands as if they didn't belong to him, as if someone else were in command. Meanwhile, Saya, Takeshi, and Psycho recovered from what happened with the help of Kota and REI. "I told you it would be a bad idea, but you wouldn't listen to me. He's very dangerous," REI would say. To which Saya, who was just regaining her composure, would say it was only for a moment. But he's holding it back. He's the only one who can do it. Thus leaving attention in the room, which vanished when they saw Takeshi, now standing, extending a hand to help Goku up. "That's true. You are the only one," Takeshi would say, thus diminishing not only the tension but also the doubt that remained in the others. Meanwhile, Goku, still pale but with a clearer gaze, would say, "I'm sorry again." Saya, approaching him with a small smile and taking his hands, would tell him, "It's okay. It's nothing." Silence filled the room for a moment, broken only by Goku's still ragged breathing. Looking at Saya's small, firm hands holding his, he raised his gaze to find determination in hers, serene vigilance in Psycho's, and even a faint spark of hope behind the fear on the faces of REI and Kota. "Thank you," would be the last thing Goku would murmur in his voice, as the situation now seemed to be calming down. Meanwhile, at that very moment, not far away, a great roar would resonate. Author's note: remember that the next chapter will be uploaded between Friday and Sunday, provided we reach the minimum goal of 50 likes. This helps and motivates me a lot to bring you this and much more content. Also, don't forget to subscribe so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers and grow this wonderful community. End of note. Next chapter, Mutants.